what are known as the Young loans, which were very important because I think they brought about the economic collapse of Germany in 1933.
That was the Young plan.
This was Owen Young, who was, of course, chairman of General Electric. Here we got a man who actually made the loans as an officer of the United States government, which brought about the collapse of Germany in 1933, enabling Hitler to take over. And then subsequent to 1933, you get a series of loans. A very good one is Standard Oil, which loaned several $1 million, at least, to Germany to build up its aviation gasoline facilities. And there are other examples.
Fine. Well, I'd like to get a little bit into the background of the financing of Bolshevism, because I think this is vitally important. And we can go back to the period after the Second Revolution, which was in October and November of 1917. The initial financing of Lenin's movement, how did it tie into the American corporations? Was there any American involvement in that period between 1917 and 1918 when Bolshevism was just beginning to get a foothold in Russia?
Yes, there were several incidents. The most important is one involving Colonel William Boyce Thompson, who was the largest shareholder in the Chase Bank, which of course today is Chase Manhattan Bank. And I published in one of my books a copy of a cablegram which transferred funds from New York to Petrograd in December 1917, $1 million to be precise. And Colonel Thompson made the statement later that this $1 million was given to the Bolsheviks to consolidate. They had just begun to take over Russia. They only controlled Moscow and Petrograd at that time to aid the control that the Bolsheviks were extending in Russia. This is a very clear case. $1 million, American funds, transferred through an American Wall Street intermediary to the Bolsheviks as a captive market, because my earlier studies at Stanford University had brought out the fact that a socialist system cannot innovate. It's got to import innovation and technology from the West. And so I think the aim behind this was to encourage the development of Marxism and other types of socialism, because this would give these Wall Street bankers control of a world market, a captive market.
At the end of the First World War,
new economic policy was started in 1923 by Lenin, and I found, and I published this in my first book from Stanford, that every single Russian industry was rebuilt or restarted by foreign corporations, mostly German, British, French, and American.
And what were these corporations? Which ones specifically were involved in
the design of the first five-year plan was by a corporation probably not known to most Americans, Albert Kahn. But Albert Kahn was the foremost industrial architect in the United States. And Albert Kahn laid out the basics of the first five-year plan for the Soviets. And then we find, again, the same corporations involved with the construction of the plants. International General Electric, most certainly, DuPont, Ford Motor, Hercules Motor, Curtiss-Wright in aircraft engines, and even some corporations which today were forgotten about, like Valti and Chance Vought. These were aircraft manufacturers at that time. And so American corporations came in and they built the first five-year plan. But what was important, the Soviets then copied these plans, and this accounts for the tremendous Russian output. They took this initial equipment and they multiplied it, they copied it.
How about Armand Hammer of Occidental Petroleum?
Armand Hammer is a very interesting example. Armand Hammer received the first foreign concession in 1822 in asbestos in the Ural Mountains. And he also conducted for the Soviets a number of other enterprises, right down to pens and pencil manufacturing, for example. But Armand Hammer is interesting because his father, although Armand Hammer today is chairman of Occidental Petroleum Corporation, his father was Julius Hammer, who in 1919 was Secretary General of the Communist Party USA, which emphasizes the argument I make throughout my books, that at the top level, there's no difference between your top communists and your top capitalists. They interlink. You've got Armand Hammer, chairman of Occidental Petroleum. His father was Secretary of the Communist Party USA in 1919.
So it's basically a power grab.
It's a power grab, and an international power grab. In effect, I checked the records in the warehouses in Supple, Maryland. I find that even after World War II, and this was against the intent of Congress, I suspect, there was a massive transfer of the latest industrial equipment to the Soviet Union under the so-called Lend-lease program.
Now, in 1948, there was a fascinating book came out by Major Racy Jordan, in which he talked about American aid to the communists as far as their ability to build nuclear weapons. Did you ever have an opportunity of verifying the facts that we had given them the heavy water, we'd given them the wherewithal to build their atomic weapons?
Well, as part of the work I was doing at Stanford, I did investigate the shipping documents for Lend-lease, and I took a sample of these documents and I checked them against Major Jordan. And broadly, Major Jordan was correct within, say, about 5%. And Major Jordan, of course, made the charge that we had shipped materials to the Soviets, 1944, 1945, which were later used in their atomic program. There is no doubt he is correct. We shipped heavy water, which is essential, but we shipped other items which are perhaps less obvious to the layman. We shipped, for example, aluminum tubes, and aluminum tubes are essential for atomic energy development. We shipped graphite, and graphite is another essential component. So generally, as far as I could check, and I checked the original government Lend-lease document, General Major Jordan was correct.
Now, as the years have gone by, of course, we see a growing Soviet nuclear threat. The Soviets now have MIRV missiles. Can you get a little of the background on how the Soviet Union, which really didn't have the technology to develop those MIRV missiles that threaten our cities today, how were they able to develop the MIRV capacity?
Well, you've got to go back and look at how the Russians were able to develop a rocket, space technology anyway. What they did after World War II was American forces were held back for a while the Soviets occupied East Germany. They stripped East Germany. They took back the latest of the V-2 rocket technology from Peenemünde and other places. And the V-2 became the basis of the Russian space technology. Now, if you skip the intervening years, you will find when you come to the early 1970s that the Russians did not have the capability to MIRV their missiles. And in particular, they lacked the ability to produce the very precision, micro-miniature ball bearings that are needed for the control systems. There was only one company in the world, Bryant, Chuck and Grinder, which could make the machinery which machines the races within which these ball bearings run. And without those races, you just cannot make MIRV missiles in any quantity. You can make one off, but not in quantity. Bryant, Chuck and Grinder was allowed to ship to the Soviet Union 45 of these machines at a time when we only had 33 in the United States.
But wasn't there any objection to doing this?
I objected at Miami Beach in 1972. Other people objected, but the objections were squashed. And predominantly at fault here is Henry Kissinger and the incoming administration, the incoming Nixon administration. This was known, I'm sure it was known in DOD. If I knew it, then certainly DOD knew it. But the objections were squashed, and there was suppression of the information.
And so once again we see America building up the military capacity, the nuclear threat from the Soviet Union.
Well, this goes, when you talk about MIRVing of missiles, you're talking about a quantum jump in your military technology. Now, I'm not a military man, but to me, the ability to do that is a massive leap forward, and we enabled them to do it, and we did it knowingly and deliberately.
What are their chief accomplishments in molding domestic and foreign policy and actual events in American history since their founding at Yale?
One is they have acquired enormous political and financial power. You'll find representatives of the order in politics.
What have they done with this power? What has happened to America that would not have happened had they not been the order?
Creation of war and revolution.
Specifically, which ones? Do you have documents on that?
The third book in this series, which I'm bringing out, takes two wars and one revolution. Well, two revolutions in one war. World War II, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the rise of Hitler, which I call a revolution in Germany. We can find the order behind the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. We can find behind the rise of Hitler. We can find in the maintenance of both of these systems, the transfer of technology to both.
Since you've already proven that Wall Street is behind the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of Hitler, now you're proving that the order is behind Wall Street.
Exactly. The Trilateral Commission about managing conflict, not solving conflicts, but managing conflicts. Conflict management, that's the cry.
So they got the profit, the power, and the management. Mm-hmm. Where do they want to steer history through the Bolshevik Revolution?
They wanted to set up, and they did, two opposing forces. Out of that came World War II. There were logical steps in the process. They used the same bank, Guarantee Trust Company, as the conduit for the financing of Hitler, and also as a conduit for financing, and also the early days of the Russian Revolution. In fact, in Russia, Soviet Russia in 1923, a vice president of Guarantee Trust Company was the foreign director of the Roscombank, which was the first Soviet overseas bank that was set up. They were that close in those days. You'll get a very close relationship between the early Hitler days and members of the order, which is in the third book.